In the remote mountains of western Montana, hidden beyond miles of dense pine forest, there was a river that almost nobody visited after sunset. Locals called it Black Creek River. It wasn't because the water was dangerous. It wasn't because of bears or wolves. People stayed away because of something much older, something they believed lived beneath the river. For decades, hunters, campers, and fishermen had shared strange stories about Black Creek Forest. Some claimed they heard voices calling their names from the darkness. Others said they had seen lights floating above the water at midnight. A few people even reported watching someone standing on the opposite riverbank, silently staring at them. But whenever they walked closer, the figure disappeared. Most people dismissed those stories as old legends. Jeremy Collins never did. At 37 years old, Jeremy had spent most of his life fishing across America. He wasn't the kind of man who believed every ghost story he heard. He believed rivers had currents, forests had predators, and fear usually came from the imagination. Still, there was something about Black Creek that had always fascinated him. One evening, while eating dinner at a small roadside diner outside the town of Pine Ridge, Jeremy overheard two elderly men talking quietly. "The river took another one." The other man slowly shook his head. "Same as always. No body." Jeremy looked over. "What happened?" The old men exchanged nervous glances. One of them finally answered. "A fisherman disappeared 3 nights ago. The boat was found the next morning." "What about him?" Jeremy asked. The old man leaned closer. "They found his fishing rod, still standing upright inside the boat, but there were wet footprints leading into the middle of the boat, and none leading back." Jeremy frowned. "Maybe someone fell into the river." The old man slowly smiled. "If that's what happened, why was the water inside the boat completely dry?" Neither man said another word. They quietly paid their bill and left. Jeremy sat there for several minutes, staring out the diner window. The story didn't make sense, and that made him curious. The next afternoon, he bought fresh bait, packed his fishing gear, loaded extra fuel into his pickup truck, and drove toward Black Creek Forest. The farther he drove, the quieter everything became. The highway turned into gravel. The gravel turned into dirt. Eventually, there were no road signs, no houses, no cell phone signal, only endless forest stretching in every direction. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, fog slowly drifted between the trees. Jeremy finally reached an old wooden sign. Most of the paint had faded away. Only a few words could still be read. Black Creek beneath it, someone had carved another message with a knife. "Leave before midnight." Jeremy smiled. Nice way to scare tourists. He parked beside the river. The place was beautiful. Crystal clear water reflected the moonlight. Tall pine trees surrounded the river like silent guards. Everything looked completely normal, almost too normal. Jeremy noticed something strange. There were no birds, no frogs, no insects, no wind. The entire forest was silent, not peacefully silent, unnaturally silent. He checked his watch. 10:43 p.m., perfect fishing conditions. He grabbed his tackle box, flashlight, and fishing rod before walking toward the small aluminum boat tied to an old wooden dock. The river barely moved. Even the current seemed frozen. Jeremy untied the rope and pushed the boat into the water. The tiny motor hummed quietly as he drifted toward the center of the river. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. No fish, no ripples, no sounds. Jeremy laughed to himself. So much for the haunted river. He cast his line one more time. The bait disappeared beneath the dark water. Almost immediately, the fishing line became unbelievably tight. Jeremy smiled. Now that's more like it. Whatever was on the other end was enormous. It pulled harder than any fish Jeremy had ever caught. His fishing rod bent almost in half. The reel screamed as line poured into the water. Jeremy tightened the drag. Slowly, the creature stopped moving. Then, it began pulling the boat instead. Jeremy stared in disbelief. His aluminum boat was sliding across the river without the motor running. What the? The water remained perfectly smooth. No splashes, no waves, just the boat moving by itself. Jeremy grabbed a knife and cut the fishing line. Instantly, the boat stopped. Everything became silent again. He looked around. Nothing. Then, knock. A soft sound echoed beneath the boat. Jeremy froze. 3 slow knocks, as if someone was gently knocking from underneath. He leaned over the edge. His flashlight illuminated the water. Nothing, only his own reflection. Then, his reflection smiled. Jeremy did not. His heart stopped. The smiling reflection slowly raised one hand. Jeremy hadn't moved. He stumbled backward, nearly falling into the boat. When he looked again, his reflection was normal. He rubbed his eyes. I'm imagining things. That's what he wanted to believe. Then, the temperature suddenly dropped. His breath became visible. The fog thickened until he could barely see 10 feet ahead. The GPS on his boat began flashing error. His fish finder suddenly turned on by itself. A single massive object appeared directly beneath the boat. Depth. 40 feet, 60 feet, 100 feet. Then, the screen glitched. The number disappeared. Instead, strange letters slowly appeared across the display. Don't look down. Jeremy's blood ran cold. The device shut off. Every light inside the boat went dark. Even the engine died. Now. The river was completely silent. Jeremy reached for his emergency flashlight. It flickered once, twice. Then it illuminated the water beside the boat. Standing beneath the surface, perfectly still, was a man. His pale face stared upward without blinking. His clothes floated gently around him. His eyes were completely white, and although he was underwater, he slowly lifted one finger, pointing directly at Jeremy. Jeremy's body froze. The pale man beneath the water didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't float with the current. He simply stood on the riverbed 30 feet below the boat, pointing directly at Jeremy. Jeremy staggered backward, nearly dropping his flashlight. No, he whispered. This isn't real. The beam of light shook violently in his hand. The figure remained perfectly still. Then, the man's mouth slowly opened, much wider than any human mouth should. Although he was deep underwater, Jeremy heard a voice as clearly as if someone were standing beside him. You're late. The flashlight suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed the river. Jeremy slammed the flashlight against his palm until it flickered back to life. The figure was gone. Only black water remained beneath the boat. Jeremy immediately reached for the engine. It refused to start. Again, nothing. Again, dead. A freezing breeze drifted across the river. It was the first wind Jeremy had felt all night. With it came another sound. Footsteps. Crunch sound. Someone was walking along the riverbank. Jeremy turned his flashlight toward the shore. Between the trees stood a young woman wearing an old white dress. Her long black hair covered her face. She wasn't moving. She simply stood there, staring at the boat. Jeremy called out, "Hey, are you okay?" No answer. He waved the flashlight. "I need help. My engine won't start." Slowly, the woman raised one arm. She pointed deeper into the forest. Then she disappeared behind a tree. Jeremy blinked. Only 1 second had passed. When he reached the shoreline a few minutes later, there was no sign of her. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. His boat had drifted to the muddy bank by itself. The engine suddenly roared to life. Jeremy sighed with relief. I'm leaving. He pushed the throttle forward. The motor screamed, but the boat didn't move. It was as if something beneath the river was holding it in place. Then, a loud splash erupted behind him. Jeremy spun around. Another splash, then another. Dozens of splashes surrounded the boat, yet the water remained strangely calm. It sounded as if dozens of people were climbing out of the river. Jeremy shined the flashlight around. Nothing, only darkness. Then he smelled something horrible: rotting fish, wet soil, and decay. A cold hand suddenly grabbed his ankle. Jeremy screamed. He looked down. Nothing. The hand was gone. His breathing became faster. "I'm losing my mind." A whisper floated across the river. "Jeremy?" It sounded exactly like his younger brother. His brother had died in a car accident 12 years earlier. Jeremy slowly turned toward the voice. Standing on the opposite bank was his brother, wearing the same blue jacket he had been buried in. He smiled. "Come home." Jeremy felt tears fill his eyes. "No, you aren't real." The figure nodded slowly. "You left me alone." Jeremy stepped toward the edge of the boat without realizing it. The voice became softer. "Just come into the water. You'll never be alone again." Jeremy placed one foot on the side of the boat. Something deep inside his mind screamed at him to stop. Then he remembered the old warning carved into the wooden sign. "Leave before midnight." He looked at his watch. 11:58 p.m. Only 2 minutes remained. Suddenly, every tree surrounding the river began shaking violently, not because of wind. Something enormous was moving through the forest. Heavy footsteps echoed between the trees. Each step made the ground vibrate. Branches snapped. Birds exploded into the sky. For the first time all night, the forest came alive. Whatever the animals feared, it had arrived. Jeremy searched the darkness with his flashlight. Nothing. Then, 2 enormous white eyes appeared between the trees, far too high above the ground, at least 12 feet tall. The eyes never blinked. They simply watched him. Jeremy's engine suddenly started on its own. Without thinking, he slammed the throttle forward. This time, the boat shot across the river. Behind him came a sound that chilled his blood. Something huge crashed into the water. The river exploded with massive waves. Jeremy looked back. A gigantic shadow was racing beneath the surface. It wasn't swimming, it was gliding, keeping pace with the boat effortlessly. The shadow grew closer, closer, until it rose beneath the boat. A deafening impact launched Jeremy onto the floor. The boat tilted violently. Water poured inside. The flashlight rolled away. In the darkness, Jeremy heard breathing. Not his own, something else, something impossibly close. A deep, rasping voice whispered into his ear. "You caught us. Now we keep you." Jeremy's heart pounded so hard he could barely breathe. The whisper echoed in his ears. "You caught us. Now we keep you." He spun around with his flashlight, but there was no one in the boat. The beam swept across the river. Nothing. Only thick fog and black water. Then, with a violent jolt, the boat stopped moving. The engine was still running, but it was as if an invisible force had anchored the boat to the riverbed. Jeremy grabbed the emergency paddle and tried to push away. The paddle hit something solid beneath the surface. It wasn't the bottom of the river. It felt like a wall. Confused, Jeremy leaned over the edge and shined his flashlight into the water. His blood turned to ice. Hundreds of pale faces were staring back at him. Men, women, children, all standing beneath the water with their eyes wide open. None of them floated. None of them blinked. They simply looked up at him. Then, all at once, they smiled. Before Jeremy could react, dozens of ghostly hands shot upward and grabbed the sides of the boat. The aluminum hull groaned as the hands began pulling it downward. The river swallowed the front of the boat. Water rushed inside. Jeremy fought desperately, kicking and pulling at the hands, but every time he tore one away, two more appeared. The boat rolled onto its side. Jeremy was thrown into the freezing water. The cold hit him like a hammer. He opened his eyes beneath the surface. The river was impossibly deep. The pale figures surrounded him in every direction. They weren't attacking him. They were waiting. Slowly, they began sinking deeper into the darkness, as if inviting him to follow. Jeremy's lungs burned. He kicked toward the surface. Just as he reached it, something grabbed his leg. He looked down. A little girl with long black hair held his ankle. Her lips never moved, yet he heard her voice. "Stay with us," Jeremy screamed underwater and kicked with all his strength. The girl's grip suddenly released. He burst through the surface, gasping for air. The overturned boat floated a few feet away. Jeremy climbed onto it, coughing violently. His flashlight was gone. His fishing gear had disappeared. Only the moonlight reflected across the silent river. Then he heard an old church bell ring. 1, 2, 3, 12 times. Midnight. The moment the final bell echoed across the forest, the river began to boil. A massive shape rose beneath the water. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't a man. It was something ancient, a towering creature made of black water, tangled roots, bones, and glowing white eyes. Its body seemed to be formed from the souls trapped inside the river. Dozens of pale faces appeared and disappeared across its skin, silently screaming. The creature looked down at Jeremy. When it spoke, hundreds of voices came out at once. "We remember every fisherman. We remember every promise. We remember every life." Jeremy realized the horrifying truth. The river wasn't haunted by ghosts. The river itself was alive. It had been feeding for generations. Every person who disappeared had become part of it. The creature slowly reached toward Jeremy with a giant hand of black water. Jeremy remembered the emergency flare gun stored beneath the overturned boat. He reached under the hull. His fingers found it. The creature's hand came closer. Jeremy aimed directly at its glowing eyes. He fired. The bright red flare exploded into the darkness. For the first time, the creature screamed. A deafening roar shook the entire forest. The river erupted into enormous waves. The pale faces vanished. The ghostly hands disappeared. The invisible force holding the boat released. Jeremy pushed himself toward the riverbank with everything he had left. After what felt like hours, he collapsed onto the muddy shore. Behind him, the river became calm once again, as if nothing had ever happened. At sunrise, a search and rescue team found Jeremy wandering along the forest road. His clothes were torn. His skin was freezing. He kept repeating the same sentence over and over. "Don't fish there after dark." The police searched Black Creek River for 3 days. They found Jeremy's truck. They found his broken boat, but they never found his fishing gear or any evidence of what had happened. Most people believed Jeremy had suffered a mental breakdown. Within a year, he left Montana and never fished again. 6 months later, a young YouTuber named Tyler Brooks uploaded a video titled, "Spending the Night Fishing at the Haunted Black Creek River." The video quickly went viral. In the final 5 minutes, Tyler pointed his camera toward the water and laughed. "I've been here all night. Nothing has happened." At that exact moment, the camera captured a pale hand slowly rising from beneath his boat. Tyler never noticed it. The live stream ended suddenly. His boat was discovered the following morning, drifting silently near the center of the river. The engine was still running. His fishing rod stood upright. There were wet footprints leading into the middle of the boat, but none leading back. And from that day on, the people of Pine Ridge added one more warning to the old wooden sign at the entrance to Black Creek Forest. "If the river calls your name, never answer."